The title this morning is The Heart of Marriage. I want to talk about the heart of marriage this morning. We're going to be in Ephesians, and we're going to be in some other places too. But here's how we're going to break this down. I'm going to give you three things that I think are right at the heart of marriage: the essence of marriage, the purpose of marriage, and the fuel of marriage. Okay? Those are the three things three movements of our time. The essence of marriage, or the nature of marriage itself. What is marriage? And then the purpose of marriage. Why does marriage exist? And then the fuel of marriage. What feeds and fuels marriage towards its purpose? Those three pieces are what we're going to tackle this morning. And it might feel theoretical in nature, but it's really, really practical in the nitty-gritty stuff that you're experiencing in your marriage right now, or you will experience when you get into marriage, or you have experienced if you were in marriage and now you're not. Like, this is going to explain a lot. I think it's going to be helpful, so let's work hard together. The first movement is the essence of marriage. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 19, verse 1. Jesus is here, and verse 1, it says, "When Jesus finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went into the region of Judea to the other side of the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?'" So they're coming to him with a very nitty-gritty, practical, real-life scenario, and Jesus is going to return to the essence of marriage to give his response. So the essence of marriage is very helpful to understand when we're dealing with very practical, nitty-gritty, everyday stuff of life. And here's what he says. "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator," now he's going to quote Genesis 2 that we've read before, that the Creator, quote, "made them male and female, and said," quote, "for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united," or cling to, or cleave, or hold fast to his wife, "and the two will become one flesh." Now, in that phrase, "one flesh," he's giving to us the essence or the heart of marriage. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. The big idea is that marriage is fundamentally a covenant relationship. Marriage is fundamentally a covenant relationship. That is the essence and the nature of marriage. It's not determined by what you think, what you feel, or what the culture says. Marriage was made by God, designed by God, and by nature is a covenant relationship. Now, in order to help us understand covenant, because covenant is very foreign to our modern Western ear, I'm going to contrast it with what it's not, because most of you, all of you who are in a marriage are in a covenant relationship. But oftentimes we bring a mindset other than covenant into the relationship. So to help us understand, I'm going to contrast it for you. Marriage is not a contractual relationship. Okay? In a contractual relationship, the priority is the rights of the individual above all things, and the primary orientation is performing for the other. Okay? So in a contract, you have this bilateral agreement that's voluntarily agreed upon and formed and maintained and dissolved at will by two individuals. Okay? So I'm going to do these things, and you promise to do these things, and I'm going to keep track of whether or not you do this or that, and if you do, then I'll stay. If you don't, contract voided, I'm free to go. That's a contractual relationship. Now, that's not the essence and nature of marriage, but that's the mindset that many people take into marriage. Making sense? Okay. Marriage is not a contractual relationship. Marriage is also not a consumer relationship. Now, in a consumer relationship, the priority are the needs of the individual, and the primary orientation is taking from the other. So the priority here are my needs being met, and I'm going to get those by taking things from you. And everything is solid and good as long as you're giving me a product I feel comfortable purchasing. So a consumer relationship with your spouse is like the relationship you have with your favorite taco wagon. Okay? And all of you got your favorite taco wagon. Don't even try to, ignore it. So you go to your taco wagon and you expect really good tacos for what? A really great price. And as long as they give you good tacos at a great price, you're there. They're a vendor, you're a consumer, this works. However, when they stop giving you quality tacos or raise the price it takes to get those quality tacos, you start doing math in your head. Are these tacos worth what I'm giving? Okay? And if you ask me personally, I'll pay a lot for a good taco, okay? But that's a side conversation. You're doing consumer math. Is what I'm giving worth what I'm getting? And as soon as what I'm getting falls below the line of what I'm giving, I start considering my options. Maybe I need to consider falling in love with a different taco wagon. Right? What happened to this taco wagon? My emotions aren't what they used to be for this taco wagon, and I thought we really had something. But what we find is in a consumer relationship, when the deal changes, the emotions change. I don't have near as much loyalty to that taco wagon than I thought I did when they started charging me $20 a taco. Okay? I mean, I was loyal to a point, but after that, I'm out of here, buddy, because frankly, there's a lot of good taco wagons in town, and I'll find one that'll meet my needs better at a better price than what you're currently charging me. Making sense? That's a consumer mindset that many of us take into marriage. The problem is, marriage was never made to function as a consumer relationship. In fact, it won't. It will eat each other up if we do it that way. So marriage is not contractual, it's not consumer. Marriage is a covenant relationship. And in a covenant relationship, the needs of the relationship are priority over the needs of the individual in the immediate present. The primary orientation of the covenant relationship is serving the other, whatever the expense. You see the difference? When I'm in a covenant relationship, the priority of the relationship is the relationship itself, not my own personal needs. And my orientation in that relationship is serving the other, whatever the cost to myself. That's a covenant relationship. That's the essence of marriage and what it is. Now, you can be in a marriage relationship with a consumer mindset, or you can be in a marriage relationship with a contractual mindset. It doesn't change the essence and nature of what marriage really is, though, and how it functions. Many times in my marriage, I have slipped into a contractual relationship. Well, we had a deal here, and she failed here and here and here, and so, what? I feel no obligation to return the favor or to stay in this deal. Or you know what? This consumer deal, it's like, I'm not getting a whole lot of this right now. And so frankly, I'm not sure I want to pay. That will eat alive the oneness that God gives to a marriage to hold it together. So let me give you another definition of marriage that's a little bigger. Okay? Marriage defined. And you probably won't get all this written down. That's okay. We're going to go through it quickly, but we'll walk back through it a little more slowly, and then I'll put this up on the internet so you can feel free to not take notes if you just want to listen. Marriage is a permanent, sacred, exclusive, intimate covenant between a man and woman, established by God, entered through the public exchange of vows, and attended with blessings and curses. That's the fuller definition of marriage defined by God in His Word and clarified for us here from Jesus in this teaching. Marriage is a covenant. Let's walk through this definition together. Covenant marriage is permanent. What God has joined together, let no man separate. And with that sentence, Jesus fixes the fundamental orientation of marriage as a bonding, permanent covenant that is built with no exit ramps. There is no intention of this thing ever not being a thing again. And so when God gives the gift of oneness to that marriage, what happens is a new being is born in a covenant. So before you're married, it was me and thee. And then you're married, and there's this new being called we. We, yeah. It's almost about today. Yeah, there's this new thing called marriage, and it's a we. It's like a new baby's born. There is a new being in the universe, and this being is us. And if we fail to understand the permanent nature of marriage, we will think wrongly about exit ramps we think we're allowed to take along the marriage journey. Now, I want to be very, very careful here. I understand it. In the following verses, they press him in verse 7. They say, well, why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. The reason he gave permission for the divorce was because you were a hardened people that were radically in sin. But it was not this way from the beginning, meaning this was not the intention. This was not the intention for marriage. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery. So I'm going to say this quickly and then move on. There are, we believe as a church, few exceptions in God's word given for marriage being permanent. Meaning there are few occasions when one could consider exercising the option of divorce. They are very, very few, and it's very, very far between. Many of you know my dad, respect him as a godly man, a wise man who's been in the valley 35 years. He spent over 20,000 hours in crisis counseling, and I asked him, Dad, as a man, a godly man, respected, as an expert and a skilled master in this area of marriage, how many times have you counseled a couple to get a divorce? And he said, over 35 years, over 20, almost 25,000 hours of crisis counseling situations, hundreds of couples a year. He said, I think I've recommended it or considered it and put it on the table as an option maybe 6 times, maybe 7 at the most. That's a very, 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 very small percentage of people that my dad has said he would say, okay, let's pursue this. Now, I'm saying that not to heap guilt on you who've been divorced in the past. What I'm saying is we got to up the ante of how we view marriage as permanent. We walk into marriage as if there are exit ramps every 3 miles on this road, and when I get tired or want to change a tire, I'm peeling off. We got to knock that off. There is something holy and sacred about the marriage covenant that was designed to be permanent, and I don't care what stupid research comes out of Harvard and Yale, it's always devastating. Because the nature of marriage is oneness in covenantal relationship, meaning marriage isn't a contract where you take 2 boards and nail them together, and they remain individual boards, and if the purpose of nailing them together comes to an end, you can simply pull a couple nails, pull the boards apart, and by and large, they're still intact. A few holes and a few pieces of wood got chipped out, but by and large, they're intact. That's not the nature of marriage and divorce. Marriage is like plywood that God glues together, taking multiple pieces, making it into a single board, and when you try to separate those pieces, you don't do it successfully, you destroy the entire board. You take a piece of paper and glue it together, it ceases to be 2 pieces of paper, it becomes now a single unit piece of paper, and if you try to separate the pieces of paper, it's just going to tear. It's going to bring destruction on both individual pieces because they cease to be individual and they became something different. They became one in this marriage covenant relationship. Now, I'm saying that to say we need to have a higher view of marriage than simply a consumer relationship. I'll change like a taco wagon when they charge me too much for my burrito, or like a contract relationship that I'm going to stop giving as soon as I stop getting. It's a covenant relationship that God designed to be permanent, and there are consequences, deep, devastating consequences when that marriage is violated and broken. Now, I realize in saying that many of you want to run. You want to leave. Because you have in the past treated it contractually or as a consumer relationship, and you're hearing Jesus' words going, you know what, maybe I didn't have the warrant I thought I had to get a divorce. Wow, am I in an adulterous relationship now? Did I cause my spouse to become an adulterer? And 1,000 other questions racing through your mind. So here's what I want to tell you to do. Don't get up and leave. And keep coming back so we can keep in conversation about what you might do now. Ask your question on text. Fire it to me right now. I'll answer it this weekend. Let's stay in dialogue about what it means to receive grace for where you're at right now and then move forward with hope, with great hope. Okay? Secondly, marriage is intimate. It's intimate. And the two shall become one flesh. This is a unique human relationship like no other relationship on the planet. It's a uniting of mind, heart, body, soul, emotions that's so personal, so complete, that nothing else can compare to it. And it's not as if the individual loses their own sense of identity. It's that a new identity is born as the two individuals come together in the oneness relationship. It's intimate. They were naked and they were not ashamed. God designed marriage to be so permanent that it would be safe for you to be naked both physically and emotionally and have no fear. that you're going to be rejected and that they'll leave. And even as I'm describing the permanence of marriage, to some of you, you're getting claustrophobic. Oh my goodness, my modern mind tells me to keep all my options open, not close them down. I'm telling you, stay with us, because God designed marriage and He designed it to be good. He designed it to be good. And when He said it's permanent, that's a good thing. It's intimate. It's also exclusive. Marriage is exclusive. No one else is involved. Meaning the husband has exclusive rights to the wife has exclusive rights to the husband, and they have a right to be jealous if those rights are invaded upon, because it's exclusive to that man and that woman. It's also public. Now, a marriage is established when public vows are exchanged. In the Old Testament, vows were accompanied often with the tearing of an animal, and so the parties would come together. They would make vows to each other and to God about future behavior that they commit themselves to, and then they would tear an animal apart, and they would lay the animal down on each side, and they would walk between the torn animal, and they would say, "So be it done to me if I break this covenant, if I tear this relationship. So be it done to me if I tear and unravel this covenant I'm vowing to keep for the rest of my life." Now, I have done several marriages in my time, and I always bring this idea up. I think, hey, it'd be really cool. What if we take an animal, okay? Any animal, I don't know, say maybe like a cat, or multiple cats. I mean, we could help the community out and do a vow at the same time here. I mean, just kill multiple birds with one stone, or multiple cats. How are you going to word it? So let's just random animal, let's say a cat. What if we tear this cat in half? We put one half of the cat on one side of the stage, one half of the cat on the other side of the stage, and then you walk up through it. We'll play like some music, it'd be cool. And people will kind of smell it, and they'll see it, and they're like, "Whoa!" And then we'll say, "Marriage is exciting. Oh, and by the way, if you break this covenant, so shall it be done to you." And they're like, "Can we just do the rings?" So I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Here's the point. It doesn't really matter what you do. Jump over a broom, stomp a glass, exchange rings. It's the process of publicly vowing before God and covenant witnesses to do certain things towards someone in the future, irregardless of what they do to you back. It's not a declaration of how you currently feel. It's a declaration of how you're going to act in the future, because you're putting your word on the line. That's the nature of a covenant relationship. It's public. A covenant relationship is sacrificial. I will do whatever it takes to fulfill my vow to you, no matter the cost to me. And it's sacred. A covenant marriage is sacred for several reasons. The first is that it's done by God. Look what he said here. What God has joined together, let no man separate. God is the primary actor in a marriage being established. Not the minister, not the couples, not the state. God is the one, Christian marriage or non-Christian marriage, who is the primary actor in joining that into a covenant relationship. Not only is he's the one who does it, he's the primary covenant witness of that covenant being made. It's got to be public, because you can't make covenants in the backseat of a car. There's no one there to hear your covenant vow and to keep you accountable. Before friends, family, and God is my witness, I covenant to you this day to be this kind of person to you in the future. That's what a covenant relationship is. Which means the breaking of those vows is very serious, because it's not just breaking a contract made by two individual parties. It's a covenant that's been made between a man or a woman and God. There's a third party involved. And therefore, if the severing of that covenant is to be considered, which I think Jesus and Paul gives opportunity for in certain scenarios where there's been adultery, or we would say abuse or abandonment, and it's of a horrific serial nature that's a pattern that's unrepentant, and there is danger present for the spouse, we would say there is reason to consider that. But what Jesus is saying, don't just reach for that button. And that leads us then to understanding the purpose of marriage, because the purpose of marriage will give weight and gravitas to the essence of marriage. So the big idea is that marriage is fundamentally a covenant relationship. A covenant relationship. The big purpose. Now, what's the purpose of marriage? If I were to ask you, what's the reason you got married, what would you write down right now as the reason you got married, the purpose you got married? You might write down, because we love the other person, I didn't want to be alone, we wanted to share our lives together. Some people told me, it was a financially prudent decision to kind of pool our collected resources to secure financial security in the past, which is also the same reason some people give me for not getting married. Well, it's actually better, if we keep our finances apart for tax reasons. I'm okay. So for a few bucks, you're going to violate God's laws? That does not make sense, but hope it works out for you. We want to start a family, we get all sorts of reasons, but here's the principle that you need to write down and think about in your mind. The purpose of your marriage must be bigger than the stress that gets put on your marriage, otherwise it won't stand. The purpose of your marriage needs to be bigger than the stress that comes on your marriage, otherwise the marriage won't stand. So let's walk through some of the purposes that you might give for your marriage and see if they will stand. For instance, we want to share our lives together. That's the reason we're married. Okay, what happens when you wake up, the person you want to share your life with is the devil himself or his cousin? This was great when they were loving me and being gentle and tender and warm. That went out the window like 3 years ago. You see what happens there? The purpose of your marriage has now become the source of problem in your marriage. The purpose of your marriage is now the source of stress in your marriage, and it will not stand. Your marriage will only stand if the purpose for your marriage is bigger than the stresses that will come upon it. How about children? We got married because we want to start a family. Awesome. What happens if you can't have kids? 3, 4, 5 miscarriages and adoption just won't go through. What about when you have kids and then they die, leukemia? Or you have kids and they're born with horrific handicaps. They're not even close to what you dreamed or thought they would be. Or you have kids and then they grow up to be complete drains on society. You have raised a complete loser. Congratulations. Okay? What's happening there? The reason for your marriage has become the source of stress for your marriage, and it won't stand. How about finances? We're combining our resources so we can secure a stable future. That's great until the housing market collapses again, or Wall Street collapses again, and you lose everything. Then the reason for your marriage is gone. Why would you have reason to stay? See, the purpose of your marriage has to be bigger than the stress that will come on your marriage, or else it will not stand. And it's ironic that the 3 top reasons statistically people give for getting married are the very same top 3 reasons people give for getting a divorce. Because the purpose for their marriage was not bigger than the stress that became their marriage. So what is the purpose of marriage, and what is your purpose for marriage? God gives it to us very clearly in Ephesians chapter 5, so let's go there together. Ephesians is in the New Testament. It's an epistle. It's a letter from Paul to the church. Ephesians chapter 5. And I'll read it for us here if you don't have time to turn there. Ephesians chapter 5, and we're going to start at verse 28. This is one of the greatest, longest passages addressing the topic of marriage in the New Testament, written by Paul. It's a glorious passage we're going to look at in depth as we finish our series out here. We're just grab a couple truths here to look at to help us understand the purpose of marriage. Because God has given marriage a purpose that you stepped into knowingly or unknowingly. So I'm going to give you now your purpose for marriage that's going to be bigger than any stress that could come upon your marriage. And God's inviting you to step into that purpose this morning. Verse 28. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. Again, he's talking about the oneness piece there. I'm married to my spouse. Her body is mine. My body is hers. We're one. And so as I treat her, I'm so treating myself. If I'm harsh towards her, if I'm demeaning towards her, if I'm unforgiving towards her, if I'm judgmental towards her, then I'm doing that to the detriment of myself, because as she goes, I will go as well. If she thrives and flourishes, I will thrive and flourish. If she shrivels and dies, I will shrivel and die, because we're united together as one. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Verse 29, after all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. There it is again. He's hearkening back to Genesis 2:24 and 25. He's saying that's the foundation of marriage. That's the essence and nature of marriage. Therefore, I'm going to draw out of that statement the purpose of marriage now. This is a profound mystery. And I'm saying it's talking about Jesus Christ and the church. You see what Paul just did? He said, I've been talking about marriage this whole time, but what I'm really saying is God gave us marriage to help us understand His love for us through Christ. You see, in the Bible refers to the people of God as a bride. The people of God are the bride of Christ. And He came once to save her and rescue her and redeem her, and He's going to come again to redeem and rescue her ultimately and take him home to be His. And when God said, how could I describe how much I love them, my unrelenting, faithful love for unfaithful people, what could I establish that they might connect the dots? I'll create marriage. Marriage was made to be the shadow of what Jesus is in substance. Marriage was given to the world to enter into as a covenant relationship to experience in part the joy and satisfaction and pleasure and happiness that it is to be in a covenant relationship with God the Father through Jesus Christ. In fact, it gets even more explicit than that. I believe God designed sex to give us a foretaste of the kind of pleasure possible when we're in relationship with Jesus. You're like, that's weird. I'm leaving. But I'm right, though, aren't I? You come back, I'll explain it to you, and it'll be less weird when I explain it to you. We'll leave it in the weird zone for now, okay? Just kind of let it be uncomfortable. It's kind of fun for me to watch you squirm. God gave marriage to humanity as a means by which we might more fully experience and understand His covenant-keeping, unending love for us through Christ. Meaning, your marriage has more profound purpose than you could even begin to comprehend in displaying to the world how Jesus loves them. And when we treat it flippantly and crassly and loosely, in and out, we lie to the world about how Jesus loves the church. That's why it's a big deal. Jesus said, my love is unending, my love is faithful, my love is unconditional. My love will always be the same, rain or shine, whether you feel like it or not. And I need a relationship that captures that. I'll create marriage. And so the purpose of your marriage is to teach the world something about how God loves us through Christ. That's a big deal. That's a bigger purpose than any stress that will ever come on it, ever. Meaning there's no stress you could face or are currently facing that can break that purpose, because God's love for us in Christ is bigger than your finances, your kids, or your feelings of falling in and out of love any given day with your spouse. So when we persevere in covenant-keeping marriage, we're testifying to something bigger than our marriage. In the good times and the bad, Jesus is greater than any stress we will face. He transcends any challenge we will meet. Which means the ultimate purpose of our marriage is to glorify God, not gratify ourselves. Now, you root your marriage in that purpose. You wake up every morning to fulfill that purpose. You wake up to walk in the essence and nature of covenant relationship. And I'm telling you, it'll change how you love your spouse today. It will. Because you'll recognize that you've probably been loving your spouse contractually or with a consumer mindset when Jesus says, no. Don't love your wife because she's got a good body. I didn't die for you because I liked your body type. I died for you because I loved you covenantally. And now we get to the third movement. And that is, I didn't give you there it is. Okay, ready? Ready? Okay, write it down. Okay, here we go. The big implication. The big implication then, if the essence of marriage is covenant relationship, if the purpose of marriage is displaying and putting on view to the world the covenant-keeping love of God for His church through Christ, then the big implication is that marriage must be fueled by covenant love. The essence of marriage is covenant. The purpose of love is glory displayed. The fuel of covenant marriage then is covenant love. What do I mean? Picture marriage like a plane, okay? If the framework of the plane is covenant, the jet engines on the plane are purpose. Wing 1 is priority, law 1. Wing 2 is pursuit, wing 2. the fuel then you put into that plane so that it soars over the mountains of stress and difficulty and heartache and unfaithfulness and sickness and disease. The fuel you put in that is covenant love. If you put in anything other than covenant love, it would be like replacing jet fuel with corn syrup. Won't fly. So what then is covenant love? Covenant love is most fundamentally and simply this. It is love that is action first, feeling second. It is action that's rooted in commitment, not feeling. It is behavior that's anchored in a promise, not merely passion. Now, in saying this, I realize I'm not just kind of bumping up against the modern mindset. I'm running in the face of the modern mindset that most of us live with, whether we know it or not. I'm not just tweaking the modern mindset. I'm slapping it in the face. Because the modern mindset is anti-law. Covenant language is commitment, dedication, service. Modern mind values spontaneity, freedom, choice, not duty, not obligation, not discipline. You see, in pre-modern times, a person got their sense of meaning out of their obligations, as a citizen, as a father, as a mother, as a husband, as a wife, as a child. Duties expected of you that in fulfilling them rightly, you received honor for. In modern times, it's exactly the opposite. People get their sense of meaning from a sense of freedom of choice. And I don't want to unnecessarily mock that, but I want to ask us, how's it going for us? Making our deepest value freedom and choice, how's that working in our relationships? When I look around, all I see is devastation and destruction. And that might not be representative of God's flawed design. It might be representative of our flawed work in God's design. Not that God messed up at making marriage, but that we've gone into marriage and messed it up because we're not flying the plane according to how God designed it to fly. We're putting corn syrup in the tank when He told us to put jet fuel in it. Now, so this is what I often hear sometimes. I don't want to get married because it's old, it's antiquated, it's not necessary, it's confining, it's restrictive, it's cold, it's lifeless, it's broken, and it won't foster true love. I don't need a piece of paper to love somebody. You ever heard that, right? I don't need a piece of paper to love somebody. I just love them. Now, when someone is saying that, they're defining love a certain way, and it's not biblical. They're defining it in a modern way, not a biblical way. So if the argument is to you, I don't need a covenant to show love to somebody, to experience love, here, if that's persuasive for you, then you have bought hook, line, sinker into this definition. It means loving you is what I feel affection from you when we're together. Loving you, I'm defining in terms of what I can get subjectively. Here's how much I want. I don't need a piece of paper to get something I want from you, which is true. The Bible never defines love as what we can get from somebody. It always defines love in terms of what we're willing to give to somebody. See, a wedding vow is covenantal. The Christian wedding vow says nothing about the present or how I feel right now. There's nothing in the vows that are like, I feel so wonderful about you right now, and if this feeling keeps up, I think this might have a shot. Biblical love assumes that's there and speaks to promises made in the future that we will hold ourselves accountable to, whether the feeling is there or not. And there it provides the stability for a relationship that would otherwise be very volatile and very unstable. I'm choosing to close all the exit ramps on this highway from here all the way home. So that one thing you can know, as everything changes around me, I'm going to stay on this highway. You're making a promise to love someone in their future self, which is crazy because people always change. If you think you're going to love the same person, it's not going to happen because marriage is so big that it inserts change on people. It's so big that it changes people so that in 5 years you won't be loving the same person you loved when you got married. So people get married, or they get in a relationship, they live together, and then that person changes, and they're like, this isn't the person I want to hang out with. Their body type changes, their personality changes, because oneness changes people, and covenant gives us the promise that no matter how you change, I will be here loving that future you. Covenantal love is always about commitment and how much you're willing to curb your choices as a way of meeting the needs of someone else. That's what true biblical love is, rooted not in freedom of choice for myself, but restriction of choice in the service of someone else. That's covenantal love. The essence of love is not a feeling, but an action. See, the modern definition of love is it's like a ditch, right? It's something you fall into. Like, whoa, 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 ah, I'm in love. Or it's like a virus that you catch, I must be in love. Biblical love is not something you fall into or something that comes upon you. It's something that you forge with commitment at its foundation. Now, many of you disagree with this, I know right now, and you're making arguments in your head, and that's okay. You're wrong, but I love you anyways. Let me help you maybe understand this truth, that covenant sustains love, not love sustains covenant. Or as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, marriage sustains love, not love sustains marriage. Because the reality is your feelings have limits, and your emotions have limits. If I went outside and tried to run a marathon right now, I would get about 3 blocks and then die of cardiac arrest, okay? Because my physical ambitions have limits. No matter how, ambitious my vision might be, my physical body has limits. So too do our emotions have limits. That's why most people who win Olympic medals report severe depression the day after they win. Crazy. Because they won and they're pouring out so much emotion and woo, and party and celebrating. Oh, say can you, and they're tweeting, and it's amazing. And then all those emotions go out. Next day they're like, oh, I want to die. Because we have finite emotional capacities that will go up and down with any given day. They are going to change. Therefore, if your commitment to the marriage is based on emotions, it's going to go up and down. They're going to be off-ramps all over that freeway. God loves us enough to know that while emotions and passion and feelings are wonderful and glorious and incredible, they're not the foundation that you build on. You build the foundation on covenant. You build the foundation on promise. And then from promise, love grows. Now here's how you've experienced in your life, you might not have recognized it. You have a kid. And for the first several years of that kid's life, it's just raw covenant love. You don't even know it, but that's what it is. They're not giving you anything in return. They're not making money and helping pay rent. They don't fix a meal. They don't change a diaper. They don't vacuum the carpet. They don't do one thing to contribute to the relationship. All they do is eat, make atomic diapers that you got to clean up, bite you sometimes, cry at all hours of the night, and demand things from you. And what do? You give, and you give, and you give. And many times you don't give because you feel like it. You give because you're committed to that child. You are giving covenantal love to that child. Meaning I'm gonna anchor my actions not based in my feeling, but based in my commitment to this child. Okay? See what's happening there? What happens when over a period of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you have been acting from a foundation of commitment to give covenantal love to that kid? It stirs feelings of love for that kid. As feelings of love are stirred, it stirs a deeper desire to be committed. And as you act in a committed way, it stirs more feelings of love. And it gets in this cycle where the feelings and the emotions and the passions for this child grow, so much so when they get to be 18 or 20, they could be a total deadbeat drain on society, and you still love them. Nobody else loves them, but you love them. You know why? Because you've been extending covenantal love to them for 20 years. Rooted in action and commitment, not feeling and emotion. The irony is simultaneously with withholding covenant love from a spouse. I don't feel like giving love today, so I'm not going to give it. You hurt me the other day, and I've taken accounts here, and I don't think you deserve me giving love today, so I'm going to withhold it now. I'm going to give it to this undeserving person who's giving me nothing in return, but I will not give it to you. And then in 20 years of extending covenantal love to a child and non-covenantal, consumer-based, contractual love to a spouse, we wonder why our kids leave home and the marriage dies. Because the reverse works as well. Tim Keller writes of an author who said that at first, the Nazis, right, hated Jews, so they killed them. And by the end, they were killing the Jews because they hated them. It works the opposite way too. And so when we withhold covenant love, then feelings are suppressed and die. And there's no feelings there, and we base our extension of love based on our feelings, so we never extend love. And then they're hurt, and they do the same thing, and pretty soon we're drifting further and further and further and further apart because we never quite felt like loving them, and giving them duty-bound commitment love felt so, restrictive and non-spontaneity. Is that a word? It didn't feel spontaneity enough. I'm not going to get it. It didn't feel good enough. There you go. That sounds so restrictive to love that way. And so the kid leaves. The highest divorce rate is not among people who have been married 5 or 10 years, but 25 years, empty nesters. Kids leave, marriage falls apart because they've been withholding covenantal love for 20 years. You see, it works, and you've experienced it. You just didn't know it. Now, the feelings of love will follow the actions of love. Jesus didn't look down the cross and say, I love these people's body type. I'll die for them. Jesus in the garden begged God for another route, and there was none. And so he walked the road to Calvary with a sense of duty, obligation, commitment, and promise to loving us even in our unloveliness, no matter the cost to himself. And in loving us with covenant love, he meets us not in our loveliness, but our unloveliness, and with his love, he makes us lovely. That's the kind of love God's calling you to extend to your spouse right now today, even though you don't think they deserve it. If you wait for your spouse to deserve your love, you will wait a long time, and you will be part and party to killing the marriage. Covenant love says, I stand here and I will extend to you what I vowed to give to you, whether you deserve it or not. And when I don't feel like it, I will trust God's plan, and I will draw down from the power given me by Christ, because I know that Christ has never had to overcome more in loving me than I would be asked to overcome in loving you. You see, when the purpose of your marriage is higher than the current stress of your marriage, you can stand in the midst of the stress of your marriage and extend the kind of God-glorifying covenant love that the world has no clue about, but that gives glory to God as the faithful lover of unfaithful people. Now, in 2 minutes, I want to give you some practical benefits to understanding and expressing covenant love. Number one, practical benefit, is that covenant love removes the work of keeping a record of wrong. Isn't keeping records of wrong exhausting? Especially if you're married to me, because the list could get very, very long, right? Oh yeah, and then there was that. Oh yeah, and then you forgot, this, the marriage game, and I rack up the list. But when you're in a covenant relationship, extending covenant love, drawing down on God's love for you in Christ, you are freed from the need to keep track of the list because the list isn't needed. You don't need the list to decide if you're going to love that day. You're going to wake up and honor the vow you made to extend love to that person because you're in covenant, not because you feel like it that day. The energy we burn deciding whether or not we should give them love that day. That's wasted energy, wives. It's wasted energy, husbands. You wake up today and extend love whether they deserve it or not, like God loved you through Christ. And if you refuse that, what you're saying is, I was easier to love by Christ than they're lovable from me. But when you're in covenant love, it removes the need to keep track of the record of wrong. Number two, covenant love fundamentally orients one towards the other, which means my primary purpose in relationship with Sharon isn't getting stuff from her, but in serving her every need. And the irony of it is, the biblical irony of it is, as I make her needs priority over mine, my needs get met in full. But the primary orientation is for me to serve her. And here's the beauty of this. The most beautiful marriages on the planet are where two people in a covenant relationship are committed to outdoing the other one and serving the other. Two servants in a covenant relationship is a thing of beauty. The most ugly relationships I've seen in a lot of my office are two taskmasters trying to beat the other into submission from the other. That's ugliness. Covenant love frees you to orient yourself towards loving the other even when you don't think they deserve it. Covenant love actually makes marriage more intimate. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? You think, well, covenant love is it's so restrictive, and man, it just narrows my options. Exactly. Because you're buying into the lie that more options will make you more happy. Not so at all. Marriage, covenant love provides a safe haven for you to be naked and unashamed, both physically and emotionally. If you're not in a covenant relationship, I don't care whatever rhetoric you give me, you are still functionally in a consumer relationship where you need to provide goods and services to a higher degree of quality than the cost that's costing them to receive it, or they will go somewhere else. Maybe not the first time, but they might buy 1 or 2 tacos that are overpriced and undelivered, but they're not going to buy 20 tacos like that. So your time is limited here, and you got to perform. You are functionally in a performing relationship when it's not protected by covenant love. Unreserved, unashamed, unbending covenant love towards you no matter what you say, think, or do. And then there becomes freedom to be, for the first time yourself, naked and unashamed, free to receive love and give love in ways you could never have outside the covenant being in place. It's just the way it is. Covenant love gives a new decision-making grid to a couple. You don't make decisions without the other. When we're in covenant relationship, extending covenant love, we make decisions not based on what I demand, what I want, what I can talk you into, but we make decisions based on what is God's will for our relationship. How do you get 2 opinionated people on the same page? Let me back up here. How many of you married an opinionated person? Raise your hand right now. Okay, the rest of you are liars. Is Sharon's hand raised right now? Is she here? It should be. Every one of us is opinionated. And you know who's the most opinionated of us all? The silent one. Not the loud one. Not the what do you It's the silent one. I have an opinion, and I'm going to hold your feet over the fire, and I'm going to put you in bondage with my silence so you can't get what you want. I'm going to watch you squirm for weeks and love it. Oh, that's such great covenant love, isn't it? It's not love, it's manipulation. Covenant love gives us a new decision-making grid. I'm not the boss of Sharon. She's not the boss of me. We're mutually submitted to each other under Christ. He's the head. He's the boss. His will is what matters. How do you get 2 opinionated people on the same page? You bring in a third party with a better agenda. Jesus Christ. And lastly, covenant love gives you a new grid for solving problems creatively. Covenant love makes you a creative problem solver. I love the scene in Apollo 13, right? You've seen the movie, Tom Hanks, greatest actor to walk the planet. Tom Hanks, he gets in the rocket. Does he go to the moon, or does he fly? Does he go around the earth, or something like that? It's been a while since I saw it, Pastor Adam. Cut me some slack. But they're up there, and something goes wrong, right? And they got to fix it. What happens? Houston got a problem in that moment. What happens down in Houston? Give me all the components they have to work with, dump it on this table, and we're going to find a solution using the parts they have access to. Remember that scene in the movie? And they find a solution with the limited pieces they have access to, and then they pipe that solution up to them and they fix it. Because they can't, mail order a new switch up to the space station, right? FedEx is great, but they just don't go that far yet. We have to find a solution within the limited lines that we have to work within. That's marriage. When you're in a covenant relationship, lots of options are wonderfully off the table. So it frees you to get creative with what you have to work with, namely the other person. Ruth Graham said it very clear. She said, in all my years of marriage, divorce was never an option. Murder, often. Never divorce. Murder, considered. We prayed about it. Covenant love fuels creative problem solving in limiting the options that you think you have that would be good to the options that you really have that are best. Now, let me end with this. If you're here, not married, living together, and claiming to follow Jesus, you're living in sin. It's called fornication. And God's blessing will not be upon your relationship. And I'm not here to condemn you or to point fingers at you. I'm here to point your face to Jesus and see what He might say about how you should go forward. You see, if a parent is asked by a kid, can I play in the street? And the parent thinks, well, they shouldn't because it's not safe, but I don't want to restrict their options. I don't want to restrict their freedom. I don't want to make them think I don't love them by giving them everything they want, so I'll tell them yes. Is that loving for the parent to do? No, it's not. So I'm here telling you, God's blessing will not be upon your relationship outside of covenant, marriage. Fornication is sin. It's wrong. If you're afraid of marriage, let God's design give you comfort. It's better than what you think it is. If you're here, not married, living together, not a believer, I wouldn't foist these on you because you don't believe these things are true, but I would invite you to consider the biblical worldview. And then as you go and have conversations today, which you probably are going to, I would encourage you to give deference to the one in the relationship with the more sensitive conscience. If one in the relationship has a more sensitive conscience and wants to change things and pursue a route you might not be comfortable with, like marriage, I would implore you to not shut them down, because what you don't want to do is to cause your girlfriend or boyfriend to violate their conscience to stay with you. Do you know why? Because that'll backfire on you. Because God gave them a conscience to be pricked when they're doing things that aren't right, to keep them on the path. So that if you deaden that to keep them with you, eventually when they're tempted to be with someone else, you'll have deadened the very thing that might have kept them with you and not with someone else. So be sensitive and give deference to the one who has the more sensitive conscience, and just keep coming back, keep asking questions, keep studying the Word of God, and test this worldview and see if it isn't good and beautiful and life-giving. And if you're here in a hard marriage and feel like, you know what, I've given enough and now it's over, I want to encourage you, keep giving. Don't extend covenant love to your kids, withhold it from your spouse, and then blame them for it dying. You have obligation to love them whether they deserve it or not, because you made a covenant vow to God you would do so. And if you extend that kind of commitment, obligatory, duty-bound, promise-anchored love, I guarantee you, you will love them into a state of loveliness they are not currently in, just like Jesus has done with you. And for all of us in the room who feel a little bit like a failure right now, here's my encouragement to you. Everyone in this room is a covenant breaker. Every one. Redemption is bloody, and it looks like a man who lived a perfect life hanging on a cross. And for every covenant breaker in this room, there is good news, because there was one who did not break covenant at the expense of his own life, and did not bail out when you were unlovable, but stayed the course and set his face like a flint to Jerusalem, so that you could experience what being loved covenantally is like. There is grace for you today, and God is saying, let's forget what happened in the past. Let's deal with where you're at today and what it might look like for you to walk forward in grace.